I appreciate all of you being here. This is really exciting and humbling to be asked to stand up here and present. This is our first year with Studer as partners. So in the room, if you can just share with me, how many people have been a partner with Studer for more than 3 years? Okay, good. How many people have developed a strategic plan and scorecard? Awesome. So I'm speaking to a group that maybe this is a new entry for. That's what I'm hoping. That you can see where our journey started, what we ventured to do, what we accomplished, and the work we still have to lean into. So Central Linn is a small rural district in Oregon. We are just south of Salem on the I-5 corridor. I have just shy of 600 students now. We have gone up in enrollment in the last 2 years, which is very exciting. As I'm sure many of you experienced, we saw a dip through COVID, and now we're starting to gather back some families and students. We have 2 schools. I have a junior-senior high school of 712, and I have 1 elementary school. Our space is really demographically, we're 80% white, 15% Latino, 5% multiracial. We have very little in our middle class population. We have some very affluent landowners and grass seed farmers. There's a lot of money in grass seed, if you didn't know, in Oregon. And then we have some families that are multi-generational poverty. And so they're doubling, tripling up in family-owned farms and homes, not seeking help and assistance. And so we have a really interesting population that we serve through that. Also very conservative in values. And as you have noticed or seen, the polarization of schools has played out really on our landscape. So some things I'm hoping you get today, some key takeaways, that you have a vision of what starting this journey looks like, from where we came, where we were just talking and dreaming about it, what would that look like, to really have a plan that the community felt was their plan. And then I'm going to describe our celebrations and some big challenges we had to overcome. Some we anticipated and some were really unexpected. So we'll start by sharing my goals for my students, my team, and my community. When we began the work of strategic planning, that was my second year in as superintendent in this district, I was talking about we needed a plan, we needed to organize, we needed to do the work. There was some pretty big resistance around why we needed a strategic plan. The district had never had one, and we're certainly not going to pay for somebody to come help us. We hired you as the superintendent. You go do that. So there was some work in that. There was, there was also a good amount of resistance at the time, a year ago, of between our public and the school really represented this voice of government, of bureaucracy, of all these things that our community did not trust. And they had heard for a few years, why that was an ongoing theme for them. So we leveraged this opportunity as a time to get together and really bridge some partnerships between what they valued and what they held and where we knew we needed to go. We needed to improve our test scores. We needed to improve graduation. We have very, very desperate outcomes for our students. Students who experience disability, less than 50% were graduating when we started on this journey. Students of color, below 60%. Students, if you're ever EL or if you're emerging bilingual student, we're at less than 70%. And for our white, middle class, upper class students, they're above 90%. So you could see some really detrimental effects to the way we were doing business. And so we needed to adjust that and address that. And in a community that had very conservative values, it was a tricky space to go into and say, we're going to lead for equity. And we're going to do that unapologetically. And we're going to say every student matters, and here's why. And when we can get them to think about the context of students that are going to live and stay in their space, it took away the national narrative and noise. So what I'm going to share with you is just kind of our journey of how we were able to bridge that gap. And so my hope and my dream for this was that this plan could help this district see the school as a resource and a tool to mobilize their community to improve. So we're going to take just a minute. I'd like you, just with an elbow partner, what are some goals and aspirations you have as you think about what is the high leverage work that a scorecard or a strategic plan could do for your community? Thank you very much for sharing with your table and your partners on your dreams as you think about this. So the process that we went through, Studer helped map out, and it's really, we took 1 year to do it, so we were a little longer than this. But really the first 1 to 3 months, it begins with gathering and analyzing the data and thinking about the engagement. What do you already have access to? What do you already know what's going on? we engaged 14 different focus groups. So we thought about our community, we thought about our business leaders, we thought about our parents, and we worked through a process of both in-person gathering sessions, some survey data, and we were finding that we were also missing some key parts. So we added some student empathy interviews for students who were experiencing our schools much differently than the normative group. The second part is really what they call aiming forward. And we used this one with our steering committee, and this was a group of 21 stakeholders, different people from parents, teachers, classified bus drivers, business owners, and we had student representatives on it. They were able to look at all of the data that was received and create some aim statements. Like, where do we want to go with this? How are we going to digest this information? And then as we got to engaging again in that final plan, we had taken that information and shared it back with our community and said, are we on the right track? This is what we heard. This is the process we went through. Do we need to tweak anything? Is there anything we need to adjust? And in our data, there weren't any surprises. We heard, overwhelmingly, like, we like the direction, we like this. But mostly that was built because all of the goals were taken from the community. Right? They were taken from the people who are going to be directly involved with this. Our teachers were part of the process, our classified representatives, our leaders, business community, they all felt like they had a voice in what we were going forward and creating our plan. Through this process, we also developed a new vision statement. This became the center and our focus, kind of coalescing all of our work. And this is where, if you asked our students, they felt like they had the most say because they were able to put in words and describe the experience they wanted for graduates of Central Linn, what they wanted alumni to come back and feel and to be proud of being part of this system. And so all through that, we came up with, through education, we prepare well-rounded, confident, and responsible individuals who aspire to achieve their potential in their future endeavors. Right? And that really opened the door that we want every graduate, every single one, to have the opportunities and abilities to then plan their future, that we haven't limited and we haven't predetermined what path that could be. Right? And that was pretty powerful for our community. There was a big push for the trades as we heard conversations that we didn't want to just hear about college and universities. And we were reminding them that how important literacy skills are, right? Numeracy skills, as we're talking about all of those opportunities post-secondary. So this vision statement, we felt, took all of those parts and pieces together and helped our community feel like, oh yeah, that's ours. We believe in this. This can be our vision statement. And our students are the most proud of it, our seniors and juniors that were on the committee. Our big wins, I will share through this process. We had 14 different listening sessions, and we're a small team, right? We're a leadership team, and I had to look around and say, whew, I can't do all of this by myself, folks, right? Superintendent, it's not gonna work. So I tasked everybody that kind of sat in a leadership role. Our facilities director, he got to lead some sessions. All of our principals led sessions, our special education director, my business manager got to lead different sessions in positions that they historically would not have, like, oh, I don't want to stand in front and gather feedback. And so Amy and I worked together, taught them how to do it. We practiced with them. I modeled for them and then sent them out to go do it. And they got some amazing results because people were willing to have conversations when it wasn't the superintendent in the room. When it was like, oh, it's the facilities guy, I can talk to him. I can tell him what I really think. So that was a really big win for us. Also, our steering committee identified themes that emerged and our leadership on this. When we gathered all the data originally, we had very, very strong views on, like, public education should be reading, writing, and math. That is it, right? And that there were strong, prominent voices in that survey feedback and the listening sessions. And then we had teachers saying, no, it cannot only be that, right? Like, that does not achieve the results we're looking for. And we haven't even talked about the students that have been marginalized in our system historically over and over. Our students were able to navigate that and make sense of it for everybody on that steering committee and say, actually, this is what the experience means for me. Amy and I, when we first started to look at the data, we were a little nervous about, like, we've got some really differing views, some opposing ideas of where we're going to go. And the beauty was, as these students talked and shared their ideas, their values, their vision, they were the voice that everybody looked at and said, oh, guess that makes a lot of sense. So the business owner who didn't have students in the system could look at the student and say, this makes sense. I understand what you're saying. I understand why you want problem solving and critical thinking along with reading. That makes sense. And the students were able to guide that. So again, a time for you to share. Think about your community engagement efforts. What would be something critical? What's a big win for you as you have an aspiration for the scorecard? So when you think about the groups you need to engage, the students, the student voice that you want to elevate, the families that have not been historically connected to your schools, your community voices, the voices that do have levers that you want to pull, how are you going to engage them, or what are your thoughts in that? So turn to your neighbor and just share about community engagement. This is when we took our strategic planning steering committee, and we took all the data and we started to discuss and get messy with it. What are our themes, what were emerging, right? And none of our steering committee had, research methods on qualitative analysis. They weren't coding themes really well. Amy and I were guiding them through the process, like put a 1 by this, put a 3 by this. If you have an outlier, we're going to go over here. It took a bit to get some movement in that, and definitely there was a lot of opportunity for what I call like bird walks, like, oh, I'm going to go over here and we're going to talk. Like, no. You have to come up with some strategies and facilitation to get the group back on. It was really great. You can see the large number of people, the group that leaned into it, that really discussed all the engagement, the ideas. And you can see on the right, this is our finished product, and we're really proud of this. So we came up with the 5 pillars out of that work, and we have engaged learning, enrichment, culture for learning, family and community engagement, and extraordinary staff. And those 5 pillars really represented the values of everybody we heard, right? That we were going to focus our energy and our work in these 5 areas. And you can see as a leader or a superintendent, like everything we do will chip into one of those, right? If we're doing professional learning, if we're doing CEL, if we're doing, it's going to fall into some component of our pillars. So as we've organized now all of my information to my board, all the information that we share publicly, we organize around the pillars. Because a big job we have is creating coherence for everybody in our system around all of the things we're doing. Like, well, why are we doing social emotional learning curriculum when you said we're adopting language arts? And how are we going to do all of these things together? Right? And the strategic plan and the pillars helped create kind of a roadmap and a guide path. And what I do and what my leaders now do is our weekly at a glance for staff and the board members, they all revolve around these pillars. And so staff can start to see and orient into it, as well as families. Like, why are we doing this? Oh, remember we said culture for learning, a safe and inclusive environment was really important. So dismantling our separate classrooms and creating inclusive spaces for students, that was key. That's why. And then, oh, okay. It gives language to our leaders and to our teachers who are being questioned in this. Our pillars also have goals under each of them. And these are big, lofty, aspirational goals. They're not SMART goals. They're written in kind of that esoteric development of how we want to be, right? Which also played well with my community. They felt like it was written for them in language that they could understand. Right? So family and community engagement, we'll use varied engagement methods to strengthen our community and strengthen our connection. So we're building internships and creative partnerships and working with our businesses to come in, and they've historically been separate. Right? Our extraordinary staff, we're focusing deeply on professional learning, and every time it comes up about how much you're spending in professional learning, I'm able to pinpoint and go, yeah, we said we needed extraordinary staff, remember? So we're going to have to pay for that, and here's why, and here's the results. Here's the ROI we're looking for, right? We want to see improved engagement in our classrooms. We want to see really rigorous instruction. We want to see thoughtful and developed lesson plans. We want to see inclusive practices, and that requires time and training with our staff. So this has given us kind of that lever to start making improvement in strategic ways. Our big wins, I shared a little bit earlier. Every audience I share with this agrees that this is our plan. So Central Linn is we're small, but I have 4 rural communities that comprise our school district, 2 cities and 2 rural regions. And so I've presented to both city councils and the Chamber of Commerce for each of them and shared, here's our plan, here's what we're doing, here's our first scorecard, here's what we're looking at. And every time they're like, no, we like that. That sounds great, Candace. Go on your way, right? Nobody believes this is my plan. Part of my goal and vision for this strategic plan and scorecard was that it would live beyond the superintendent, right? That it really could be the driver for success in this system. And that nobody saw this as the superintendent coming in and forcing a plan, but whether I'm there or not, the plan would live. Growth would happen, improvement would happen. People are now not resisting the role of superintendent in the change. They're buying into like, oh yeah, we agreed to this, right? We believe this. Our staff shirts for Welcome Back have the 5 pillars. And somebody mentioned to me in the hallway, they're like, nobody can say we don't know what those are now, Candace, you're right. They're everywhere. So we're starting to see them grow and multiply in lots of ways. We have alignment in the direction we're going. And again, that's not dependent on me. Creating inclusive classrooms, dismantling our segregated spaces is no longer dependent on the superintendent being in the position or a principal being in the position, right? It's a system driver that the board has bought into, believes in, and has moved forward with. Right? When we say that every student matters, we mean it. And we will work together to create solutions for identifying the barriers and overcoming them every time. And when we use that language with our board and our community, when we talk about these students are going to be your neighbors. They're going to work at the store. They're going to be, living in your community. They're not leaving Halsey region. They're going to be around. They're like, oh yeah, you're right. I said, so let's give them every skill we can while they're with us in this space. And that language change came from our strategic plan and really, really deeply listening to our community and to people involved in this. Our wins also, our board is focused on student achievement and well-being. And over the 3 years that I've been in Central Linn, this is a change. When I started, it was very, very tactical operation level. What are you doing about this problem in this bathroom around this time, this facility issue, no discussions on student achievement. I think my board couldn't tell you what our student achievement was outside of a state report card. So now they're leaning in and asking, like, hey, Pillar 1 says engaged learning. What are we doing about that? What does our data say? What are our progress markers? Are we looking at our interim data? Do we see growth? If we don't see growth, are we really transparent about that? And then did we make a plan to adjust it? So the lever is getting our board to now ask questions differently. So instead of me always telling them, stay out of operations, they are asking about improvement in student achievement because it's aligned to the pillars. And so they're able to ask thoughtful questions about process, about their role, and they're able to answer to community members differently in that way. Like, no, we have this plan. We have a great plan. We involved all of our community, our families, our students to lead the direction. So it gives them a little bit of cover as well as board members as they're going forward, hearing questions. The pillar champions have also increased ownership. So if you haven't heard this before with Studer, one of the ideas is that every pillar has a champion, and that's not the superintendent. So I'm the champion of the entire strategic plan. But on my leadership team, everybody is responsible for a different pillar. So my elementary principal he's the champion of Pillar 1. My special education director is the champion of Pillar 3. They are required to present every week at a different meeting. So we do a rotating leadership tactical meeting. And so at one meeting, it's going to be, Pillar 1 is coming up. Joel, you need to be ready to present. What do you need? Where's the information? How are we doing as a district? What are you missing from your counterparts? What do we still have going forward? Right? This has been key in the superintendent not owning the strategic plan, in it becoming part of everybody's workforce. Our facility director is part of Plan 3, right? Creating a safe and inclusive class and space. Physical space matters in that. So he's presenting on that both to the board and to our leadership team routinely. So he owns it as a champion. And I will tell you, in the beginning, they were really nervous and a little sassy with me about it. And now that they've done it, they're like, oh yeah, that's mine. I'm ready for this work. We're going to get into that. My communication to the other audience is also aligned to the pillars. So each time I present on a different topic, I'm talking about the scorecard, I'm talking about the transparency of it, I'm talking about the markers that we have. What's our good data? What's our really, really ugly data? And we have some data that is not fantastic. We surveyed our students and we found that they felt the most unsafe on our buses. And these are our elementary learners. And that was heartbreaking for my team. They read that and they were devastated. Like, Like, how do we adjust that? How do we monitor that? But we also can't keep that secret. We need to talk about, this is the data that our students have, this is their lived experience. How are we going to shift and adjust? And that helps build the bridge for why we make changes. Right? There's an impetus there, and people already have an understanding of like, oh, this is what's happening, so there's a connection to the change. So our challenges, we had some big ones in the beginning. Overcoming, why do we need to do this? Why do we need help with this? I mentioned this in the beginning. We hired you as the superintendent. You have experience. What are you doing? Go facilitate it, lead it, take care of it. And there was a good amount of frustration or angst or anxiety about creating, why do we need a plan that says what we just know we should be doing for education? And if you haven't spent time with your leadership team creating focus and coherence, that feels really like another step. And so you have to really get them to that why. Why do we need a plan? What does this do? How does this help our community understand our work? How does this help our students see their voice and work in our plans? That education is not just happening to them, as was mentioned, right? We also had, why do we need to do this? Why is this important, right? We need to raise test scores. We need student achievement to go up. We need graduation to improve. Do that. Like, oh, you are correct. All of those things are true. This is the vehicle to help us get there. This is one of the ways we can do this. The public scorecard was the biggest seller for my board, making it very, very transparent where we were at and owning the ugly data. Right? And I talk about that with my board a lot, that we're going to own all of our data. We're going to celebrate our wins, but we're going to have very hard conversations about the areas that we are not yet doing what we need to do for students. And the students in our system that are not being served, let's talk about that very openly. That was a big selling point for the board and the community. They felt like, well, good, because we don't know what you have been doing for the last 2 decades, apparently. So we're sharing it on. The other part was the scorecard. What does success look like? Really determining that. And this took some work with our leadership team where we said, if our pillar is engaged learning, what does that mean? Right? There's so many ways we can grab the data and say, we're going to meet it this way or this way. It took some navigating and negotiating with the leadership team. What are the metrics we're going to use? How are we going to evaluate student learning over time? What makes the most sense? Because there's some things that can be great sources of data, and they're too much of a lift for a leadership team. Right? They're too onerous and too hard. And so we started with grabbing some wins on data sets we already had. Where did we already have, we use MAP and NWEA data. Where could we already start to leverage that? Where could we use information and sources? We do 9th grade students on track. Right? We already report that. We have that information. What if we just use this? That was a win for our leadership team, to not feel like every part of the scorecard was another lift. Right? But really we were harnessing information and resources we already had. So I would encourage you as you go through this, really thinking about the scorecard as an opportunity to point out where you have information, because we all have tons of data we collect for our systems, and then what can we use where. We added in the student surveys for each of these. So we do the employee survey, we do the parent survey, and the student survey. And so each of these now are coupled with different indicators to represent the very public scorecard on how we're doing. Right? So parent satisfaction. Do parents feel safe and welcomed in our schools? Do they feel like their language is valued, that they are greeted at the door, like all of these pieces that are really important that we heard from our families? Does that show up? And if not, what are we doing to improve it over time? Our challenges, some more. As we developed the plan, it was presented to the board adopted. I went back to the leadership team, and they were like, whew, we can take a breath, Candace. We can breathe now. And I was like, oh, friends. So the work has just begun. We're never going to go as slow as we went last year to develop the plan. And there were some tears and some angst and some anxiety around that. And then a deep understanding that this work is continuous. And we're not going to be perfect at it, but we have to lean in and rapidly move. We have students not reading. We have students not graduating. And that equates to livelihood. We have students being segregated, right? We have classes separate for disability. That's an unacceptable answer as we go forward. So we have to rapidly change to adjust for our students. That was a big challenge for the leadership team. Also to sell that back to teachers. right? Teachers are not the biggest fans of change, even when they said they wanted it. And so we had to do good communication planning. We were very intentional and strategic with our union leadership, both classified and licensed, about what we were doing all along the way. They never felt like this was happening to them. This was definitely, they were part of the process. That was a key win for us, right? Was getting their voices bought in and felt like they were partners in it. And then understanding how much push is appropriate. I have wanted to go really fast. I was sharing with Michael at lunch that when this started, we got all of this done, this was great. I was ready starting this fall, like, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna get this done, we're gonna get this, and watch my leadership team like okay, probably I'll take a step back and we can go slow on this. And so a big learning I've had is to tempo my own excitement and energy through it and allow my leadership team to help guide the pace and tempo of it, because they really have to own it beyond me, right? Beyond the superintendent. And then keeping my leaders going and keeping the push. So what I tell them is like, you're gonna be comfortably uncomfortable and you're okay, right? Because growth happens outside of the comfort zone. And so we talk about that a lot as a group. So I'll ask you just your last little bit here. What did you learn? So with your group, you can share with your table or elbow partner. Is there something you learned, something you already knew and were reminded of, and what was validating for your own practice? One of my favorite parts of sessions like this with leaders from all across the country is networking, learning new things, meeting people, hearing ideas and perspectives. I will just say that you are all brave leaders for taking this on, and it is some of the most amazing and tremendous work. And so I encourage you to lean into it, to think about how this can be the bridge between your community and your school systems, right, and how you can amplify student voice. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Candace.
Yeah.